Welcome. So let's get this show on the road. Let's just make sure nothing incriminating is on the screen for me. There we go. So let's get my screen sharing and we will get started with this webinar. Fantastic. Let's move this out of the way. Perfect. So welcome, guys. Welcome to this year's first webinar. Unfortunately, it's taken us until March to get to the first webinar, but this one's going to be on lighting, particularly as this month is Loxone's focus on lighting. And we're going to be looking at a few different things around lighting and how it can, how you do lighting with Loxone, I suppose. Throughout the webinar, the chat is open, so you're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat. If I miss it, my colleague Nico will pick it up and shout at me from across the office, or he might be able to answer it in the chat for us as well. So let's start off by looking at what content we're going to be covering today. So we're going to start off by looking at some power supply calculations and what our recommendation is. We're going to be looking at the supported lighting protocols and the Loxone products that we have within our lineup. Some config tips and tricks. So things that we've learned over the years, things that we've got in practice in our office, things we've got in our own personal installations, and things that are definitely worth being aware of that you can then implement within your projects as well. We're going to be looking at operating modes, how you can utilize them with your lighting. Of course, we're familiar with what auto config does, where night mode is automatically configured in things like thoroughfares and bathrooms and in the kitchen, perhaps. But how can we add more to influence what we've got going on within our lighting? And then automatic designer. So what has automatic designer got to offer us? And what can our customers use automatic designer for? So let's start off with power supply calculations. And this is kind of a hot topic, simply for the reason that loads of people have different opinions. And of course, having a professional judgment is very important, but also let's keep it simple, and we've got a recommendation for it. So what is the power supply calculation? Ultimately, we need the sum of the power required by all of the peripherals connected to your Loxone installation. Of course, this is a lighting webinar, so we're not really going to be talking about audio and all the other additional peripherals. But let's look at the things that we can influence with lighting. So how do we calculate this? Of course, we need to know how much each light fitting is going to actually consume. And the data sheet is going to tell us this. A bit of maths, because of course, one data sheet isn't going to tell us, and a bit of common sense, because of course, if we look at a whole building, are all the lights going to be on at 100% all at one time? So why is this important? Ultimately, it all comes down to savings, and savings can be looked at in multiple different aspects. Power supplies, we're not wasting purchasing additional power supplies, and of course that comes down to money. The more power supplies you have, the more panel space you need, the more time it takes you to install it. So all of this very quickly adds up. And ultimately, we want to stop this from happening. We don't want loads and loads of power supplies in a cabinet when really it can be just very few. Now, this could be, of course, the power supply and backup, but also we could just look at other power supplies available, because sometimes there's no need for a 40 amp power supply in a smaller installation. And this is how we do it. So let's take the Loxone Spot, for example. The Loxone Spot is rated at 7.5 watts. And at 7.5 watts, you realize that measurement at 100% brightness. So your 100% consumption would be at 100% brightness. And you'll notice that the consumption of the Loxone Spot isn't linear. So if you get to 50% brightness, 50% brightness isn't actually 50% of the power consumption. Now, you'll start to realize why this is important when you think back about your Loxone projects and how your lighting controllers will automatically be configured. By default, the lighting controller will set your lights on the bright mode to be 80%. And one of the reasons for that is at 80% brightness, we're at 60% power consumption. So if we're at 60% power consumption at 80% brightness, then very quickly you can see how your power supplies can be reduced as you increase your light fittings. At 50% brightness, we're at 25% of your nominal or your rated power consumption. So a massive saving. Now, of course, we're not saying let's spend the rest of our life at 50% brightness, because 50% brightness isn't really enough. But when you're looking at mood-based lighting and when different areas of the building don't actually need to be illuminated, or different areas of a room don't need to be as bright, this is where your savings are. And when you've got the beauty of Loxone Tree, you can individually control each fitting. So let's have a look at how we could potentially calculate this. So if we bring up a calculator and take a simple calculation of 7.5 watts, 7.5 watts, and if we then multiply this by perhaps 30 fittings, if we have 30 fittings, we're now at 225 watts. And if we then divide that by the voltage, 24 volts, we're at basically 10 amps. So 10 amps is a, what, £150 power supply? But if we take it into consideration that 80% brightness versus 100% brightness, there isn't too much of a noticeable difference in terms of the light level in a room. So if we're happy with 80%, we're now at 60% of our consumption. So just for example, so if we take 10 amps, well, sorry, no, we'll do the 9 point, whatever it was, so 7.5 multiplied by 30, divided by 24 volts. So if we take that 60%, we're now at 5.625 amps. Now, of course, in terms of the Loxone power supplies that we sell, we don't sell a 5.625 power supply. We, of course, have this 6.25, but ultimately we're not seeing a massive saving here. But if you think, if we have 30 spots across multiple rooms, are all of those lights going to be set to their bright mood all at the same time? Unlikely. More likely going to be 50%. So we've now gone from 100% brightness being 100% of our consumption, 80% brightness now 60% of our power consumption. And now if we're saying only half of the rooms are realistically going to be on at a maximum, then we're now looking at 30%, which is why the power supply calculation in config is set to 30%. So again, if we do this calculation, divided by 24 volts, and we now take our 30%, we've now got 2.8 amps as our calculation. So now we can be looking at a 4.2 amp power supply, which is about a third of the price, which makes sense considering it's 30% of the power consumption. This is a significant saving there. And as your installation grows, that's where you're going to see quite a big saving. So power supply calculators is very important. One other thing to consider is LED strips. So with LED strips, you'll find that with the 5 meters of LED strip that Loxone sell, the maximum rating is 86 watts for 5 meters. So if we divide that by 5, we're now looking at 17.2 watts per meter. It's not possible to achieve 17.2 watts per meter on the LED strip. The reason being is because with the RGBW dimmer that you're going to be using to control it, is you've got red, green, blue, and then white. If you're going to be using the white and you want to make it warmer or cooler, you're going to be mixing in the reds or perhaps the blues. Or if you're choosing a color, the white isn't used at all, and it's just the RGB. So really, your maximum possibility is going to be in the region of 60 watts. So straight away, we've saved 20 watts on that power supply calculation. And these are things to be thinking about when doing your calculations, when you're doing your panel build, and when you're doing your proposals to your customers, because there's a significant saving there that you can get from reducing power supplies. Spiel over. Let's look at some supported lighting protocols and why they're important. So let's start off with tree. We all know tree. And of course, the benefits of tree are massively diverse. Now, we're not necessarily a lighting manufacturer, but we do manufacture lights. And I'm sure the range would potentially grow in the future. And at the moment, we've got spots, ceiling lights, pendulums, and also, of course, the LED strip and the table lamp, of course. And with these lighting fittings, instead of wiring them in circuits and controlling them how you would with mains, we can wire them on one tree cable. I could have each of these 4 different types of fittings on one cable and control them all individually, because tree gives us the flexibility of addressable lighting, things that we will be talking about a little bit later on. But not only can we control them, but controlling means dimming them, controlling the color, of course, on and off. But also we can then do mood-based lighting, and we can mix these together. We can put them in groups. We have so much flexibility, and it doesn't really matter how we wire them down the line. So we can then move on to PWM. Now, PWM has such a massive potential behind it, because this is how, I won't say all, but most extra low voltage 12 or 24 volt lighting and all LED lighting is dimmed. Because if you have an LED, your LED isn't going to be running at 230 volts. In your individual light fittings that you're buying from Screwfix or your local wholesaler, they will have a small transformer built in, and the physical LED is receiving 12 or 24 volts. So if we're then dimming on the main side and then relying on a transformer in the middle, that's why you're not getting necessarily a great dimming curve. But dimming on the actual LED side, on the DC voltage, you'll get that much smoother dimming. And of course, with DC dimming, you've got a little bit of a different science behind it, which is PWM. And that's why sometimes if you film a phone screen, your phone screen uses the same PWM technology for dimming, because it's turning the screen on and off at a certain frequency, which why if you're filming your phone screen, you'll get some sort of flicker. Now, the RGBW dimmer, the RGBW 24 volt dimmer tree. Now, this could be a massively longer name, because really it's not just RGBW, you can also do single channel dimming. And because PWM is just on and off, if you don't want to dim, you don't have to. If you've got an appliance, whether it's lighting, whether it's a lock, mag lock, or potentially a spring-loaded lock or a latch lock or I don't know, strike lock, these are all running at 12 or 24 volts. So this means we could use the RGBW dimmer, and per output, it works at about £17 as opposed to £23, £24 from a relay. So again, quite a good cost saving there. You get a smoother dimming, but not only does the RGBW 24 volt dimmer support 24 volts, but also 12 volts. So quite a lot of flexibility there. Now, of course, the range of 24 volt lighting out there isn't massive. Of course, we've got the Loxone tree fittings, we've got LED strips. LED strips are flexibly available all over the place, but your regular lighting, like your downlights, pendants, your general lamps, they're not necessarily off-the-shelf products. Therefore, most people point towards either tree lighting or they'll point towards your traditional mains dimming. So that's why we're doing a little bit of research, particularly Nico, not myself, in finding some 24-volt fittings, and hopefully we'll be able to start recommending some more to you, because that's what you'll find a lot of in other European countries. And of course, with PWM, with the RGBW dimmer, you will get the same sort of benefits that you get with, the tree spot. Same sort of power supply, or sorry, not power supply, power consumption benefits that you'll get. So let's move on to 230 volts. Of course, we know that Loxone can control 230-volt lighting, whether that's switched through a relay on the mini server, relay extension, or we could look at potentially one of the retrofit options, the Nano IO or the Nano dimmer. And of course, we've got the mains dimmer extension as well. Now we've also got 0 to 10-volt dimming. So with 0 to 10-volt dimming, it's worth remembering that with 0 to 10 volts, sometimes 0 volts doesn't actually mean off. 0 volts could mean the lowest dimming level. So you may need to allow for a relay as well. So this is another option of controlling lighting. It's not as common. Sometimes on more luxury fitting, you'll find it, but it's not as common as the other options. The next thing, which we'll do a bit of configuration with today, is DALI. And I've also made sure to mention DALI 2 here, because with DALI and DALI 2, they are a little bit different, but also can be cross-compatible. So we've got two DALI products, or DALI supporting products, which is the DALI extension and the DALI Air. So with the DALI extension, we have the ability to support up to 64 devices. So this could be, if a downlight is addressable individually, that could be a device. Or if you've got a DALI driver, just LED driver, and you've wired some downlights on a circuit, that driver would be your device. Or you can have up to 16 groups. Now with DALI 2, DALI 2 is a newer generation of DALI, but DALI 2 lighting would still work with DALI 1, and DALI 1 lighting would still work with DALI 2. But what DALI 2 enables is the ability to have inputs. So with inputs, we can use DALI-supported motion sensors, switches, keypads, and things like this, and that can then come into your Loxone installation. At the moment, DALI 2 is only supported by DALI Air, which is great for retrofitting, but also commercial applications where you might have such a long run that having a DALI Air may make more sense, because you can have them out in the field. But the DALI extension will support DALI 2 within the next 2-3 months. All existing DALI extensions will receive a firmware update to support DALI 2. And then there will also be a second generation DALI extension, which will have a little hardware change. At the moment, the specifics of what that hardware change really means, I'm unsure. But it means that you will then be able to use some DALI 2 peripherals within your Loxone installation if necessary. Now, of course, for existing installations, it doesn't really matter because they're already there. But the DALI 2, the DALI Air already supports this. Now, the limitations or the supported devices of the DALI Air is only up to 10 devices, which is fine because it's more of a field device where you're serving maybe a couple of rooms. And again, 16 groups. Cool. And then we'll just move on to DMX. And DMX, I won't compare it to DALI too much, but again, it's another sort of addressable lighting solution. Primarily found in the events industry for like your light fittings that you might find in a club where the light can move, but also can change colors and dimming levels and things like this. But then you can also find other DMX peripherals like relays and dimmers and other things like that. But we already make those. So moving on to config tips and tricks. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the the Dali Air. So I've got a couple of some Dali fittings here. Now these are just Dali lighting. We haven't got any inputs, but showing you how easy it is to implement with Loxone. So let's go across to Loxone config. And within Loxone config, I have already paired my Dali Air. With the Dali Air, we have got the ability to set different applications. So with our different applications, we can either broadcast, and this means that any Dali device which is connected to my Dali Air will all receive the same command. So all devices will be controlled simultaneously. However, these devices need to support the Dali broadcast option. And we can test that in a moment. And then we also have the option for individual devices. So individual devices, we can see here, similar to the Dali extension, we've got the option to add up to 10 devices and also groups. So if I click on devices, similar to what we're used to with Air and with Tree, you click on it and then go up to the top, we've got Dali device search. And I can just click start search. Now, if it's a new installation, if you can just click new installation, it will factory reset the lamps. And then we can then control all of the parameters from here. So I'm going to tick new installation, then start search. And yes, I want to reset it. So all the devices will need to be repaired. Of course, you'll never want to do this if you've already got an existing installation which you're adding to. So we'll just wait for this to search. It can take a couple of seconds. So I've got 3 fittings. Here we go. So we've got address 0, address 1, and address 2. Exactly like we're used to with other Loxone peripherals. If I select the device, it will begin to identify. So I've got now a Dali lamp flashing. I can move over to the next one. Again, the next lamp will begin flashing. And finally, the third one will begin flashing as well. The other option I've got is I can press activate all, and this will send a broadcast command so that all devices on my Dali bus will then turn on or deactivate all, and they all turn off. So we'll look at the example of configuring them as is. So this one, I've got them lined up. So this one's going to be my middle lamp. This one is my left lamp. And this one is the right lamp. There we go. So I can close this, and then I have my different Dali lighting devices. I've got my different parameters. So when the lamp is first turned on, what value does it go to? So 100% by default. So if they lose power, what happens to the lamp? So by default, it's going to go straight to 100%. I could say retain last state, go to off, or go to a specific value. So let's say for whatever reason the Dali bus went down, or sorry, that would be system error value. So for whatever reason, if there's a power cut and then it came back on, what would the lights do? We've then got the system error. So if the Dali bus went down, what happens? So you could say that all of the lights turn off, they retain their current state. So if they were off, they would stay off. Or if they lost connection, you could get them to turn on to a different level. Potentially for an instance of, let's say there was a fire and whatever happened, the Dali bus went down, but the light still had power, you could get them go to a certain dimming value. And then, of course, you've got your dimming limits. So these can be set by the device themselves. So because the 3 lamps that I've got, they are all the same. So these will have the same parameters, but this could be adjusted accordingly. So I'm going to add a lighting controller. And I can connect these 3 fittings individually. Save into the mini server. And I'm going to connect via the app. Here we go. Go to rooms, not assigned our lighting controller, so I can turn them all on and they all turn on. And then I can control them all individually and they all get that command appropriately, similar to what you would get with your tree devices. So we've had exactly, as soon as I adjust the value, the lights respond instantly, just as you would expect. But remember, we are controlling it over a bus as opposed to physical dimming with like maybe PWM or mains phase dimming. Now, what I'll do is I'll show you the example of grouping them. So of course, at the moment, we've got our individual devices. So I can go to groups, add DALI device group, and I could name these my ceiling lamps. And then I can see amongst all of my different devices that I have, I can then select them. So now all of these can be controlled in a group. So let's go and add this to my lighting controller as well, save into the mini server. Rooms. So now if I go ceiling lamps, I can control them all and they're controlled all together. Oh, I seem to have broken it because I am trying to control them all in a group. Save that again. Go back. So now I can control them all as a group and they're all controlled as one, like you would with a group of Loxone spots, for example. Now, let's look at the third and final option, I suppose, for controlling lighting with DALI is, like I said, we have that broadcast option. So if I get rid of my different devices and my group, so I've kind of put them back to their state that they were in previously. And I can now go back to my DALI Air and I can go to broadcast. So if the broadcast application is activated, all DALI devices and groups will be removed. So I didn't need to remove them a moment ago, so that's fine. So now with DALI broadcast, I can again connect this to my lighting controller, save into the mini server. I can control them all, and all three of my lamps have turned on. I can turn them all off, all of them turn off. And that's because one command is being sent across the bus and they are just reacting accordingly. So I'm not controlling them individually. There's no a specific group. For example, I could have 10 different DALI lamps here, and I always want them to do the same thing because they're in one room, for example. I could set it to DALI broadcast. You may find that some devices don't support DALI broadcast, so it's just important to check that prior. But this is quite a good application for DALI. We'll leave that as is for now. Cool. So I'm just going to head back to my presentation because there's a couple of things I'd like to show you in config. So presence-based lighting above desks. This is something that we have found really beneficial here in the office, but also you may have seen in some marketing videos of the Loxone campus, where the lighting in the thoroughfares around the office is bright and white, so you can see where you're going. And then lighting above the desks is orange, really dim, unless people are occupying that space. And that just means that if somebody's at the desk, it then illuminates. As somebody walks away, it then dims back down. The reason why we've chosen orange is because orange is only consuming about 1 watt on the spot. So it's the lowest power consumption we can get from the spot without actually turning them off, because we wouldn't really want to turn the lights off in a working environment. But because we're reducing it to 1 watt, we're now saving loads of energy over a long period of time. Because if we look in this instant here, I've got 8 spots over that desk, 6 over here, and 6 over there. So quite a significant amount of lighting. So let's look at how we would have done this. So I'll go back over to config, and I'm going to add another lighting controller. And I'll just label the original one Dali, and this one's going to be my office. So within my office, I could have a series of different lighting. So it could be that over the thoroughfare areas, they're always going to be bright and at a standard level. We're never going to be changing it. So we could just stick to a relay-driven light. So we could label this Good England, walkway lights. And I'm going to assign this to the lighting controller. Now, this is going to be on regardless of what's happening, of course, other than at night. Then when it comes to lighting above desks, I'm going to want to add a few Loxone light fittings. So I'm going to go and grab the LED spot, add a few of these. So I've got I've got 4 spots, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to group them so we've got desk 1 and desk 2. So what we'll do is we will highlight these 2, and I'm going to put these in a lighting group called desk 1. And I'm going to put these ones in a lighting group labeled desk 2. Now you'll notice that once I've put them in a lighting group, I then can't drag them out individually because they're in a group. Similar to the incident we had with Dali, I can't control them individually when they're connected to a group. So I've got my groups. So I'm going to go to my lighting groups. We've got desk 1, and I can select desk 1 and connect that to my lighting controller and do the same again for desk 2. So now these lights are going to be controlled as groups. Now, we need a few lighting modes. So if we double click our lighting controller, we're going to have bright. Now, bright could be our mood for cleaning and things like this, but we're going to need a general blanket lighting for working, and we're also going to need our specific moods for when people are actually physically at their desks. So what I'm going to do is click the plus. I'm going to say, label this mood working. And this mood, I'm going to select all off and just enable walkway lights. So when somebody enters the office environment, the working mood will activate, which just activates the walkway lights. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the desks 1 and desks 2 to be on that dim orange. So I'll select the master color because I'm going to control them both. Select orange, this is already a default favorite, and I'm going to just drop that brightness value down to around 50% and select OK. So now I've got my orange for desk 1 and 2, and I've got my walkway lights on as somebody enters. Now I just need to make sure that under the automatic tab, I select the mood that's going to be selected on motion to be the working mood, like so. Now the next mood to add would be for desk 1 and for desk 2. So desk 1 and desk 2. So for desk 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the value for desk 1, go to colored light, sorry, not colored light, the white light, and I can select the maximum brightness for that desk to ensure the correct light levels. I could just drop that down a little bit because as we know that between 80 and 100%, there's not too much of a noticeable difference. So if we can save a bit of energy with 80% brightness, then that's even better. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to save that as a favorite because I'm going to use that again in the moment for desk 2. So this is going to be my value for desk 1. And then this is just for desk 1. So I need to make sure that walkway lights and desk 2 are off. Then for desk 2 lighting mood, I can do the same thing, but this time for the relevant lighting group. Select the correct correct value. So now we have our working mood, which will trigger as you enter the office. Our bright mood, which will trigger as we activate cleaning mode, for example, so everything's nice and bright. We have off, desk 1, and desk 2. Now, in its current state, what will happen is every time we tap the switch, these moods will be triggered. If I want to mix the moods, I'll have to do it from the Loxone app or have a switch assigned to those moods. But what I want to do is I don't want desk 1 and desk 2 to be something that's triggered from switch in that room. So I need to untick this plus. But what I do want to happen is it to be a presence-based mood. Exactly why I've written it here, presence-based lighting. So presence input. This doesn't mean that it's triggered via the presence sensor as you enter the room. That's always done from the automatic tab. This is allowing you to trigger presence via logic. Now, this could be a presence sensor under the desk, but more so for more custom logic. So what we'll do is select OK to this, and we'll save into the mini server just so we can have a quick look at what the just so we can see what the app is doing. Open that up, rooms, assigned. So we now have our office lighting controller. We've got our working mood, which is giving us our 50% orange light and our walkway lights on. Bright is everything on, 80%, and also the walkway lights on. Off, desk 1, which is more or less 80%. I'll just correct that because of my OCD. There we go. And the desk 2 is off. Desk 2, then we're setting the 80% brightness, like so. They just need to remember to save these because otherwise it's not going to save properly. So we've got our different moods. And at the moment, we have working that's enabled via presence. And if I want somebody to sit at desk 1, I would need to go into the app and trigger this. So now both are mixed together. And that means that my walkway lights are on and desk 1 is on. If I then mix in desk 2 comes on. Somebody leaves desk 1, that then mixes out. So this is one way of doing it. But doing it from the app isn't very practical, and giving everybody in an office environment access to the lighting just could potentially lead to havoc. So let's see how we can do this via automation, because that's of course what we're all about. Now, what I'll do is I'll add a presence sensor for the general office area, and we'll add a normal touch as well, because that's what we're potentially familiar with in a room. So we'll connect this like so, and I'm going to add myself the brightness value as well. And then I'm going to have a presence function block. This is what we'd be familiar with for potentially environments where it's a recreational space. This is what autoconfig would automatically generate for you. I've just realized I've actually got both a touch tree and a presence sensor paired to my mini server, so I might as well use those. Touch tree, brightness, and there we go. Select my presence sensor. So now my presence sensor can trigger presence so that when I enter the room, this will trigger my working mood. Now, I want to trigger my desk 1 and desk 2 as I sit at the desk. So you'll notice now that because I selected the presence inputs for desk 1 and desk 2, my inputs on the function block have now adjusted. So no longer is it T51, T52, T53. It's now P2 and P3 because these are now presence inputs. So I can select these, and these inputs can now be used for logic. Now, if you want to trigger this through the app and through automation, what we can do is I can create 2 presence blocks and just hold Control on my keyboard so I can make 2. And we now have our presence blocks, which we're going to associate with the desk. So I'm going to label presence as desk 1, and now desk 2. Desk 1, I'm going to connect to P2 because that's the input associated with desk 1. And then desk 2 is going to be connected to P3. Let's tidy that up a little bit. So when we're triggering presence on desk 1, this now means that we are going to be mixing in that desk 1 mood. This is how it would be normally configured. So for purpose of simulation, I am going to trigger regular presence with a virtual input. And it's also important to note that during presence, we're always going to have that overrun time. So the overrun time for the office could be 15 minutes, half an hour. But for the desk, as soon as somebody's left, if there's nobody left at that desk, you might as well just turn the lights off. So you could maybe give it 60 seconds as somebody can walk away, get their belongings, and it is no longer going to keep the lights on. For the purpose of our example, we will set this to 10 seconds just so that we can see it happen in real time. So I'm going to save into the mini server and head back to the Loxone app. So in the Loxone app, we have our not assigned room. So we have our working lighting at the moment. And currently we've got the overall presence for the room. We've got desk 1, we've got desk 2, and we've got our presence example. So what I'm going to do is I need to now mix in desk 1. So desk 1 can be, as we've said, isn't going to be triggered for a switch, and we don't want to do it manually through the app. We want to do it automatically through somebody just using their computer at a desk. So if you have the Loxone app installed on your computer, you will notice that you have the option presence detection. Presence detection, you have the option to select in one room or in several rooms. So we want several rooms. Now, this means that for the example of a Mac, in the top corner, we have the Loxone app icon, and you can see we have the ability to select a mini server. So I can select all the different mini servers that I have access to. I have presence detection, and you can see I can choose between the 3 presence blocks that I have access to in my user. So my user admin has access to everything, of course, naturally. And what I would like to do is I would like to mix in desk 1. So I've now sat down at my desk, selected desk 1, and you can see it's mixed in desk 1 mood. I now leave my desk or put my computer to sleep. So I'll simulate this by just disabling presence. I wait 10 seconds, and you'll notice this mood will then fade out. Because remember, we set the 10-second overrun time to the presence block. There we go. Desk 1's been faded out. Now, let's say I've moved to desk 2. You can see desk 2 is mixed in. Now, you may be thinking, why would I do that when I could just go to the Loxone app to mix it in and out? But if you're always sat at the same desk, once you've set this once, every time you sit at your computer in that space or in that office, the lights will mix in. And as your computer goes to sleep or you go home for the day, you won't be signifying presence at that desk. One thing for this to work is you need to be on the same local network. It doesn't work over remote connect. So if I was to go to my house, for example, I wouldn't be able to select my living room, for example, to signify presence. So you won't have lights randomly coming on and off throughout an installation. So I can then disable this, and you can see desk 2 will fade out in just a moment. There we go. Desk 2 has faded out. So this is one thing really, really cool to offer in commercial installations, but also this would kind of work for one lighting controller for an open plan living area. So if you are using Loxone in a residential space, it's becoming more and more common now to have a kitchen, living, dining area, perhaps. And the amount of times I see more than one lighting controller in those spaces pains me because it is still one room. And yes, this one room has multiple different purposes. But if we're going to be sticking to automation, we can mix these moods in depending on what we're doing. So if I come back out of here, probably should start assigning these to rooms because otherwise it's going to get confusing. Set this to study. Let's study. There we go. And I'll set this to server room. So if I create myself a new page, I'll use the example of having like a kitchen, living, dining area. So let's add another lighting controller. Had a question. Do you have to have the Loxone app open on the Mac for it to sense presence? So Bradley, what you don't need to necessarily have it open like this. And same with Windows as well. The Loxone app will still run in the background, so I could close the Loxone app and to the point that it's no longer open. But at the top, you can see in my systems tray, as you would potentially refer to it on Mac and also Windows, you can see it's still there, and I can still signify presence. So I could go desk one. The Loxone app is still not open. I now open it, and you can see that desk one has been mixed in. You don't need to have it fully open. You just have to have it kind of sat in the background in your system tray. And this works for both Mac and Windows. So for an open plan living area, so what we're going to do is we're going to have, again, a few different lighting circuits. So we're going to have an RGBW dimmer. We can have some switched lighting. Let's add ourselves a dimmer extension. That. Let's add one more. Let's add some spots. We would like the normal spot will do. Like so. So we have 4 lighting circuits here. Now, we're going to label these in the lighting controller. So we could say we have our kitchen lights. These could be spots. Ignore the fact of it's an RGBW dimmer and stuff. I'm just using it as an example circuit. These could be some pendants. This could be some wall lights. And this could be, again, some living spots, lounge spots, like so. So same again, multiple lighting circuits, and we can have multiple lighting moods. So of course we could have a bright mood again for the example of cleaning, but we could have our cooking mood. We could have our dining mood, and we could have our movie mood. So again, same sort of instance where we what we did before. We can have our presence inputs enabled. Of course, we may still want to be able to select these moods from a switch so we can cycle through them. But these are going to be area specific. So cooking, obviously, in the kitchen, dining in the dining area, movie in the living room. So for cooking, I could set the kitchen spots to something nice and bright. And then for dining, I want the pendants on. And I also potentially want the wall lights on to be at 80% or maybe 60% for a more moody environment. And then movie, we might want the lounge spots to be on at a dim pink, for example. Set yourself in the mood for that Saturday night. And then for your wall lights, we might want to put these on at 30%. So if you move across to somewhere else, you might be able to you might be able to make your way to the kitchen or something like that. But these are things that we're still going to want to trigger via presence. So we'll just press OK. Now, if we have a look at our inputs, you can now see we've got our cooking, dining, and movie moods. all available as presence inputs. So these are, what I'm actually going to do is also add an additional mood, because we want that blanket mood again, so that when we enter the room, we're not in complete darkness. So we could go for our ambient lighting. I'm just going to swap this with cooking. Right way to confuse myself. The reason why I've done this is because I would still like to have my switch connected to T51 if I was going to have one, and still not have the problem of not being able to scroll through my moods, because the presence inputs are just on the rising edge, the mood's mixed in, on the falling edge, the mood's mixed out. So if I was tapping a switch and pulsing it, the mood would switch in, then switch out, switch in, switch out. So we wouldn't want to do that. So having that general ambient lighting mood is important. So that could be some orange light here. Of course, you don't have to have orange light. I'm just using it as an example. We'll just actually we'll switch it up a little bit, just so we've got some variation, like so. So we have our ambient lighting, our dining, our cooking, and movie, like so. And then in terms of inputs, we have our T51, which is our ambient lighting mood. We have our dining, our movie, and our cooking. So naturally, with the switch, we're going to want to connect the switch to our T51 input, like so. Then we can scroll through it. Now, when it comes to our P2, P3, and P4, these are going to have to be something that are area specific in that room, that signify you're cooking, you're watching a movie, or you're eating dinner. So one thing that's quite a cool example would be putting a presence sensor underneath the dining table. So as your legs go underneath the dining table and you're eating dinner, you mix in the dining mood. So if we go to the airbase and add ourselves a presence sensor, naturally we don't want to add a presence sensor tree, because having a cable underneath the dining table wouldn't be necessarily the easiest thing to do. There we go, presence sensor. And because it's going to be battery powered, you wouldn't be able to use the acoustic element to it. You would only be able to use motion. And we can then just connect this directly to our P2 input, which is our dining mood. It's important to remember that, of course, we've got overrun times to remember. So if we have our legs under the dining table, we don't move them for 60 seconds. We don't want the dining mood to then mix out again. You have to kick your legs around. So it could be worth adding something like a presence function block, or a switch off delay. So if I add a switch off delay like so, I could say that there has to be no movement there for at least 5 minutes before that mood is then mixed out again. I'm just going to put this 5-min delay as a note there to remind me later. And then when it comes to movie, of course, with movie, we're watching a film on the TV, we're watching a film on a projector or something like this. And when we turn the TV on, the power consumption is going to increase. And what could we measure power consumption with? That could be a smart socket. So smart socket, I will find here and click apply. Now, of course, naturally my relay needs to be active, otherwise there's going to be no power going through to the TV. But with the smart socket, we have our power readings, so we can measure how much power the TV is using. Now, of course, the TV is going to use a certain amount of power on standby. But if the TV is on standby, we know that it's always going to be below perhaps 20 watts. And when the TV is on, it's going to be above 30 watts. So we can use that to create a threshold to say, when it's above 30 watts, mix in the movie mood. And when it's below 20 watts, mix it back out again. So this is going to be a threshold switch. So we can connect our analog input here, And this is giving us a reading in kilowatt. So remember, it's only going to be in watts unless your TV's drawing kilowatts. You need to get a new TV. It's broken. If we go to movie, so what we need to do is we need to say the value turned on when we are at 30 watts. So the output turns on when we go to 30 watts, and the output turns off when we get to 20 watts. And that's what this will do here. We don't need to worry about pulse duration because we're using the output, not the on and off pulse outputs. We can name it if we like. So this then means that when the TV turns on, movie is mixed in. When the TV is turned off, movie is mixed out. Now, cooking. 9 times out of 10 when you're cooking and you're in the kitchen, you're using the hob. When you're using the hob, you're going to be using the extract fan, the extract hood. Now, whether that's one of those fancy ones you get now built into the worktop, or whether it's just a general extract hood, there could be many different ways of signifying that you're cooking. It could be that there's power being drawn by your oven via a CT clamp or an inline meter. It could be using integrations like Home Connect. You could be using a Nano 2 relay tree. There's so many different options you've got. So you could use a smart socket as well for an extract hood. So let's use the example of the Nano 2 relay tree. So with the Nano 2 relay tree, if I add one of these, a Nano 2 relay tree is primarily known for being used for shading. But if we turn it into a universal input or a universal application, we can now use these relays freely, which of course by default are labeled up and down. But we could use these relays to interrupt the supply to your extract hood. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want to do this all the time because you want to just use the buttons on the extract hood. But so you could use it in emergency situations like a fire or something like that. But what we want to do is we want to use the current flow option. So the current flow option is something that's used for setting the drive times for blinds, but you can also use it for seeing when current is flowing through the Nano 2 relay tree. If I just open this up and go to the data sheet, you'll be able to see here that the where's current ranging? There we go. So we got the current detection range between 100 milliamps up to 5 amps. So what we can do is we can measure the extract hood when we first install this, and we can then set this parameter. So very easy to do. So firstly, this relay, we want it to be permanently on. So I'm just going to invert it down here. Just label this extract hood, and I'll label this one TV so we don't get confused. And then we have our current flow input. So let's take the example that we're using 100 watts when the extract hood is on. So if we divide that, we're going to be using about 500 milliamps. So if we take 500 milliamps and set this as the threshold for current detection in the Nano 2 relay tree, whenever the extract hood is turned on and we're using 500 milliamps, it will then mix in the cooking mood. And then as we turn the extract hood off, it mixes the cooking mood out. Now, what would likely happen again is you've turned the extract hood off, you're now plating your meal, so you don't want it to turn off instantly. So again, we can enter something like a 5-minute switch off delay, like so. And now we've automated turning the lights on above the dining table. We've automated the TV lights coming on, and we have automated the cooking mood. So if we save this into the mini server, again, I'm going to make that adjustment so I can simulate this. So let's say this is, again, 10 seconds instead of 5 minutes, because I'm not going to be waiting here all day. And what we can do is we can set up so that when you walk into the room, we're triggering that ambient lighting mood. Let's go into here. and we want to go to not assigned. So we want to trigger the ambient lighting mood. So if I turn on live view, you can now see my lighting is on at 20%, 50%, and 80% on that ambient lighting setup. Now, let's say I have begun cooking. So I've begun cooking and I'm going to start live view of manual value adjustment, and my extract hood is on. So my current has gone up to 0.5 amp. You can now see that my kitchen spots have maintained 80% brightness, but instead of being that blue, they're now a bright white. And then I turn off my extract hood and wait the 10 seconds as the example. And you'll be able to see in just a moment that this will then revert back to mixing out the cooking mood and goes back to the blue. Same again for the TV. So again, we could say for the TV, we are now drawing 40 watts. And our movie mood has been kicked in. Now notice that nothing has changed because our movie mood is actually doing something slightly different, because the values of the movie mood is lower than the lights were already. So if we find that so if I mix out the movie mood again and mix it back in, you can see not really anything changes other than the wall lights. The lounge spots have maintained 50% and at their current color level because we're telling it to go to a pink at the same brightness level. So the brightness level is not changing, so it maintains its current state. So this is just quite important to remember when you are doing mixing of lighting moods, that it will always only take the brightest value. If you give it a lesser value, it will maintain its current state. Okay, so we mix out our movie mood, go back to let's say 10 watts. You can see the threshold's turned off and our movie mood's already turned off because I mixed it out myself. And finally, let's turn on our dining table. So turn that on because I'm now at the kitchen table. My wall lights have gone up to 60%. My pendants are now on, illuminating where I'm eating. I then finish dinner, move away from the dining table, and these will then mix out after 10 seconds. Like so. So this is a great way of automating and using one lighting controller for a large space. And you can see the example in both a residential and a commercial application. One question we get quite a lot is circadian lighting. Circadian lighting is really easy to do based on using colored and dimmable lighting. So in an update, I think a couple of years ago, the new tab of daylight control settings was set up, where what you can do is you can say that you have a mood, which is daylight control. This could be quite useful in commercial applications. And between sunrise and sunset, the lighting will then simulate what the sun is doing. You can set your minimum and your maximum color temperatures. So we can set these in the parameters of the lighting controller on the left-hand side. So you can say the minimum at the moment is 2,700, maximum is 6,500. And of course, we can set what type of lighting it is. So the kitchen spots is direct lighting. And we could say we've got LED strip, and the LED strip could be indirect lighting. I believe if we hover over this, it gives an example. There we go. So this affects the color temperature when using daylight control. Indirect lighting uses cooler colors. So this is the parameter setup of it. Then when we go back to Loxone, the Loxone app, and we select perhaps our kitchen spots, you'll notice we have the option for daylight control. And what daylight control does is it uses exactly what we were just discussing, the parameters between the minimum and the maximum color temperature. And depending on the lighting circuit, of course, with the spots, we've said that they're direct lighting. It will then remain with the warmer colors. For the indirect lighting, it would use cooler colors. I could, because I've set this to daylight control, if I wanted this lighting circuit or this lighting group to be circadian lighting or offer circadian lighting, we could actually save this as a mood. So whenever this mood is enabled, we then have circadian lighting, which is quite a cool feature. Again, mostly valuable for your commercial applications, but also going to be quite beneficial for residential as well. History. History is something, again, in the Loxone app. So if I go back to Loxone, you can see down here we've got history. And this is now really beneficial for when you're trying to potentially understand why the lighting controller might be working in a particular way. Potentially, if your customer is reporting a certain behavior when it shouldn't be doing that, and you're trying to diagnose an issue. So you can see here the most 20 recent activities since the last mini server restart will be shown here. So you can see, firstly, 6 minutes ago, the mood was set to ambient lighting by myself. And then we can see that the presence was detected by switch off delay, 5-minute delay. So we could adjust the naming here because, of course, this is visible in the app. And presence / motion automatic ended by switch off delay 5 minutes. So the mood cooking was activated, and so was the ambient mood. Things were adapted and changed. So you can see quite a lot of detailed information here down to the second. Note that this is only for the duration that the mini server hasn't been saved into or restarted. You can increase this up to 100 or down to 0 so you don't show any history entries. But if I just save into the mini server now as an example, go back to the lighting controller, you can see there's no entries here because we've just saved in. But it really is a helpful feature, especially for things like climate control as well, although we're not covering that topic right now. Function block presets. So for function block presets, we've got the ability to create a lighting controller exactly how we want it, and then replicate it again. So if you think about those applications in residential settings and in commercial settings where you have rooms, although aesthetically they might look different, if you think of the technology that's in them and their function, they may remain the same. So if we take the example of a bathroom, maybe you have 2 en-suites in a building or in a property. You could have your spots, you might have some LED tape or a mirror light, and you could have potentially some wall lights in there. And if this is exactly the same in both examples of your en-suite, all you need to do is configure that lighting controller once. I'll show you exactly that. So what I'll do is I will create a new page. I'll create a lighting controller. And I'll label it en-suite 1, en-suite 2, like so. And I'm going to connect my outputs. So again, I'm going to use a spot for each, some LED strip around the mirror, and I'm going to add some wall lights which are going to be switched. So we've got our spots, LED strip, and our wall lights. So this part is still the same task. Of course, if you're using auto config, it should be relatively painless. But when it comes to the parameters and adjusting things like your moods, if they're going to be the same, there's no need to do it multiple times. And ultimately, putting minimal effort into this sort of thing because the customer's going to change it anyway. So I can label these spots, mirror, and wall light. I could create some moods. So bright is bright. I could call this getting ready. I could call this night. Because I've got OCD, I'm going to reorganize these like that. I can then configure what they do. So the mirror is going to go to that dim orange at night, and the spots could go to a red, again, quite a dim red because it won't wake you up. Getting ready could be a nice bright white for the spots, and same for the mirror. And the wall lights could be off, don't necessarily need to be on. So these are some lighting moods that we've just set up. We've got our outputs, we've got our lighting moods, and we've got our namings that we adjusted. Now, if I go to Ensuite 2, although our outputs are the same, you can see the naming hasn't been adjusted and the moods have remained untouched. I am going to adjust a parameter here just to show you the example for the Ensuite. So let's say rather than turning off after 15 minutes, we want the lights to turn off after 5 minutes after motion ending. And I want this lighting controller to mirror onto Ensuite 2. What I do is I go down here, create a new preset, and I could call this Ensuite lighting. And I want this to adopt parameters and settings. Note that this is including lighting moods, lighting circuit configuration, and automation settings. The reason why this is important is because if I had my spots and my mirror light and my wall lights in a different order than the same as the other one, it won't behave as you expect it. It's really important that they're in the same order. So we've done Ensuite 1. And again, to show you, we've got our configuration set as is. This one, you can see the parameter is still remaining the same and nothing else have changed. So now if I go down to block preset, I can adjust this to Ensuite lighting. You can see that off the get-go, the name has stayed the same, nothing else has changed, but you'll notice the parameter has now adjusted to 5 minutes. And you can see the naming of the outputs and the moods have now been adopted. So all I need to do is do one lighting controller for the same room or same type. Of course, they don't need to be the same size and shape and things like this, but the technology needs to maintain the same. And we've now got a preset. If the customer makes changes and you want to put it back to the default, you can always use the RTD input, which is reset to default. Of course, important for things like hotels and potentially even commercial environments like offices where you don't want people to just mess around with things. But also, if the customer's made a change in one of the ensuites, maybe that's during handover, and they want that to automatically go across to the second ensuite. So what I can do is I can go over to here. I can adjust perhaps my wall lights now come on for getting ready as well. And my mirror light goes to a pink, like so. You can now see that the block preset has got an asterisk next to it, so it's different. So would I like to restore the preset to be what it should be, like I said before, or would I like to update the preset to be this new revision? So I'd like to update it to adopt these changes. Do I want to update the function blocks that use this preset or not? So yeah, I would like them to. So now Ensuite 2 has now got the pink mirror light and the wall lights are on. So again, a really powerful feature for when you're commissioning installations, not just for when you need to reset things back to default. And then the last things for dynamic parameter adjustment is going to be, keep clicking things. Dynamic parameter adjustment is when you want to adjust parameters dynamically, hence the name. So a great use case for this is night mode. So let's say we are turning the lights off we've gone to bed, we've turned the lights off, and we get up and go to the bathroom. Usually when we leave the bathroom, the lights turn off after perhaps 5-10 minutes, 5 minutes in our case that we've set here. But let's say that during the night, once you've left the bathroom again, rather than turning off after 5-10 minutes, we wanted to turn off after 60 seconds or 2 minutes. So we want to adjust that time. So a great function would be the analog multiplexer. There we go. So we've got the two-way analog multiplexer. So with the analog multiplexer, you can feed it two values, whether that's through inputs or whether it's through parameters. And we can then select it depending on what our input is. So firstly, I want to be adjusting the motion extend time, so MOET. So if I click on the display connections option and I select MOET, I can now connect something via logic to that parameter input, and you'll notice that now this value is set by logic as opposed to in the parameters list. So under the analog multiplexer, I would like to say that during the day, the lights turn off after 5 minutes, and during the night, the lights turn off after 60 seconds. And I would like this to adjust based on the selection input. So you can see when the selection input is 0, it takes value 1, which is our 5 minutes. And when the selection input is 1, it takes value 2, which is 1 minute. And we want this to be done via night mode. So if I find night, which does not exist, so I create myself a night mode, I will have a switch function block and connect the current night mode like so. So if I take my night mode and add a switch like so, I've now got my ability to turn night on, which would usually be on the central page. So I can save that into the mini server. And you can see if I turn on live view, you can see currently I'm sending 5 minutes. Let me just zoom in. You can see I'm sending 5 minutes to MOET. Now, if I turn on night mode, so night mode turns on. Of course, normally it would turn everything off, etc. But you can now see that now night mode is on, and we've got an on value going into the selection input. We're now sending 60 to MOET. So we're now dynamically changing that value so that instead of turning off the lights after 5 minutes, it's now 60 seconds. So great for nighttime. So many different other applications for this. Personally, I've got it set up for my night light. So next to the bed with the normal touch night light. The display brightness during the day, I've got set to about 50% when idle, so I can just glance over regardless of the brightness. But at night, 50% is quite bright, and it could disturb you. So rather than putting up with that or changing it manually in the app, you could dynamically change it so that instead of 50% brightness during the day, we're now at 1% or 0%, so it's not on at all. Another great application for the analog multiplexer. Okay, now operating modes. So operating modes is just one more topic really, which is how can we incorporate operating modes to change how our lighting behaves. So let's create another switch just as an example, and this could be our cleaning mode. So if we add an operating mode, call it cleaning, and go to add output, like so. And what we want to happen is when cleaning mode is active, if the lights are already on, we want them to go to the bright mood. And if lights aren't already on, then we just go to the bright mood when motion happens. So if I go to on suite 1, for example, and I go to automatic, you can see at the moment, during the day, we will go to the getting ready mood. But now, if we go to the active operating mode being cleaning, we want to select bright. Now, normally, if an operating mode changes whilst the lights are already on, they will only change once the lights are off, then turn back on again. And when you walk in, instead of going to getting ready, they'll go to bright. But we want it to happen so that if lights are already on, you want it to go up to the bright mood. So we want to say always change. So always change means that regardless of what the light's doing, if they're on, they always move to the bright mood. If the lights are off, they stay off until somebody enters that room. A great application for cleaning. And then the final and last thing I'll show you for operating modes would be, zoom out again, could be related to the lighting in the living room. So again, if I add a switch, movie, connect this to the switch. And now the reason why you might have an operating mode for movie is you could be having multiple things happen at once, whether it's lighting, whether it's your blinds closing, whether it's you controlling your media controller, your audio. You might need an operating mode for this. So for lighting, the way you could do this is instead of doing such thing like mixing in via the power of the TV, you could have it so that when the movie mode becomes active, the movie mood is triggered, and you could either mix it in with the current mood. So same sort of thing. If the general blanket lighting is on, and the movie mode becomes operating mode becomes active, the mood comes on. Alternatively, you could say always change. So depending on the application, if it's a cinema room or a general living room or sitting room, the action might vary because it might be frustrating every single time if the lights always change rather than mixing in, because you don't want to plunge everyone else into darkness, especially in this open plan living environment, which is why I generally recommend mixing it in. But just take that into consideration. So this is another way of saying that we've got the TV on, so we want the movie mode to be mixed in, as opposed to doing it in this method here. And then it means that we can use this switch block to pulse other actions, or we could use the movie operating mode to trigger other topics as well throughout our Loxone installation. Okay. And the last thing before we finish, automatic designer. And this really, my favorite topic for this would be the outside lighting. So for outside lighting, the amount of times that if you want to, like people want to automate this usually. So again, I'll create another page. Usually for outside lighting, we'd have a lighting controller and we could have our, let's just say on and off inputs. And this could be several different outputs for our outside lighting, whether it's wall lights, spots, pendants, floodlights, whatever. We will then have people who would have a pulse at function block. So the pulse at function block, you could have, say, I want the outside lights to turn on at perhaps sunset. And then I want the lights to turn off again at 11 o'clock. I'll just say lights off at 11 p.m. And it'll be like this. Now, of course, you can adjust this, the pulse out function blocks via the user interface. This was a new addition from a couple of years ago. This used to not be something you could adjust in the app. But also, of course, you've got to remember people don't necessarily use the pulse out function block all the time, but rather use the time functions. So we could say pulse at sunset to turn the lights on, and then we could say pulse for day, so that at midnight we turn the lights off. And then the customer will never be able to adjust this unless you go into Loxone config. However, alternatively, if you give your customer access to automatic designer, which I'd recommend they should, what I can do is I can go to automatic designer, add automatic rule. So my condition could be at sunset. My lights, which I've named poorly. Let's just adjust this. So I label them so I can find out which is a which. like so. Let's save into the mini server again quickly. So automatic designer, add rule, condition. We want to say pulse at sunset, add action. So our action is going to be turning on the outside lights. So turn on the lighting. And we can just say outside lights on at sunset, sunny set. And we can create another one for when the time equals 11 p.m. Then we turn the outside lights off. Like so. And of course, doing it this way doesn't really change the functionality. We're always going to be turning the lights on at sunset and off at 11 p.m. But it means that the customer can go back into here, make adjustments. They could disable this function temporarily if they wanted to. Perhaps they're going on holiday, they don't want the lights to go on or off or whatever they want to. They could change it so the times that come on and off. And they then don't have to contact you as an installer to make that such a small adjustment. In config, you can make automatic rules. You'll notice we now have an automatic rules page. If you make an automatic rule in config, you can't change it in the app. So if I was to go here and label this, we'll create another one, so automatic rule. So I could go automatic rule and I will just add a random one here, like so, and save into the mini server. If I go back to automatic designer, you can see I've got automatic rule. Oh, that's changed. We can now adjust it. This is new to me, new news. So you could ignore the fact. You make it in config, the customer can change it. So it's up to you. You could make it here in config so that the customer can then change it in the app, or you could do it in the app with them at handover so you can show them. So it's a good educational opportunity. I think that covers the topics that I wanted to cover today to give you a brief overview of what you can add to your lighting installations. I hope you guys have all enjoyed this lighting webinar. Hope you've learnt lots and it's given you a bit of an idea of what you could potentially do with Loxone. It's been very quick, so you're more than welcome to give us a call, ask the team questions, and if there's anything else we can go through in more detail with you. But lighting with Loxone is really powerful and could be just one product group that you could focus on within your Loxone installations and absolutely master it. So yeah, thanks again for spending an hour and a half of me chatting away and listening to the sound of my voice. But yeah, see you next time. There hopefully should be another webinar in the next couple of 2 to 3 weeks. And I might nominate Nico to do that one. So yeah, see you soon.